Hi, this is the Stockscores Market Minutes for May 9th, 2014. This week, my topic, patience with your winners. I'm going to go through some examples from my trading week and show you the importance of being patient with your winners. You know, the big winners do not happen very often. I would say out of every 10 trades, perhaps one or two are the big winners that really add the profit to your overall performance. It's important then to let the winners run and limit your losses. When you have a winner, let it go and do its thing. And when a stock trade isn't working, you got to get out of that trade and move on to the next one. Even with a losing percentage, you can still make market-beating profits if you have patience with the strongest stocks you own. Now here you can see an example that demonstrates exactly what I'm talking about. When we look at the trades that I did last week, you can see that here there are 12 trades, and actually 7 of them did not make money. That's only a success rate of only 42%. However, there is one big winner there, the opening trade on this spreadsheet, and then there's a couple of other rather large winners with a risk reward of 4. There's a bunch of small losers, and that's the key, is that the losers are small and the winners are much bigger. The result is a profit of $6,939 with a $500 risk tolerance, or 13.88 times risk. Now, if you make your risk tolerance $100, then your total profit would be $1,388. If you make your risk $1,000, your risk is $13,880. But again, what is key is that the overall profitability is really only there because of the one big winner and the two reasonably large winners out of those 12 trades. All right, let's get into the market analysis. The first chart is the chart of the S&P 500, which has been working its way back to that long-term upward trend line. On a weekly basis, the volatility is not that great. You can see that the range this past week is relatively narrow. However, if you were trading the market this week, you'll know it was a difficult market to trade. There was a real lack of opinion. One day we'd be up, the next way we'd be down. In the morning we'd be up, in the afternoon we'd be down. It was very hard for the market to move anywhere, and that is what made it a difficult market to trade. What that shows me is that investors are really not sure what to do next. We've had money coming out of the sort of more speculative tech stocks and that sort of thing, and moving into the more conservative large cap stocks, and that is what's holding the actual index up. But until we get a breakout through that red line of resistance, you can't really say that this bull trend is going to continue. At the same time, if we get a break of the upward trend line, which I've drawn in green, well, then you have to be pretty nervous about the future of the market going into the summer. So it's a real critical time, because in the next week or two, we should get our answer as to whether we're going to break through resistance and continue the upward trend, or if the upward trend line will be broken. The Toronto Stock Exchange has been going straight up since last summer, largely on the strength of the energy sector. I would say that that energy sector is a little overbought right now and due for a pullback, but this week we still have not seen a break of the upward trend line. So my expectation is long-term remains a positive looking chart, but in the short term, I wouldn't be surprised if we get something of a pullback motivated by some profit taking in that leading energy sector. The TSX Venture has been trying to build a base after a very lengthy downward trend. It had been looking promising at the start of this year, but it's really fallen apart in the last week, and I think that we are going to go into a little bit of a quiet period. I don't think necessarily moving to new lows for the TSX Venture. I think we've made a bottom and are certainly trying to stabilize the market, but it's going to take some time for this market to reverse. Of course, as we go into the summer, a traditionally slow time, particularly for the TSX Venture stocks, I think you have to be cautious in this market and only trade the real leaders, the stocks trading with a lot of volume and some good price appreciation. Treasuries have risen up to their long-term downward trend line, and this week we saw some selling pressure come into the Treasury market. I think that will likely continue. The market has hit resistance, and it looks like there's a good chance it's going to top out here and pull back in the near term for U.S. Treasuries. The U.S. dollar has held support now intra-week, early in the week. It was actually down below support, but it managed to come back and rally to hold that support line. So although it's a bearish chart, we still haven't broken that critical support line, and it may be that the US dollar can break the downward trend sometime soon. Of course, if we see a pullback in treasuries, it may coincide with some strength in the US dollar. Gold is in a bearish trend. It has risen up to the downward trend line. We've been watching for a break of that downward trend line, but it just can't seem to get a footing. And with the strength in the US dollar toward the end of this week, that sort of took some of the excitement out of the gold market. We have to remain bearish in this market now because that downward trend line has not yet been broken. And until it is, we will either be neutral or bearish. Oil market pretty strong for the last 4 months, but for the last 3 weeks it has been weak. And it looks like we can continue to see some short-term weakness in the oil market, although the long-term outlook is neutral. Finally, the VXX, the fear index as it's often called, is moving to new lows, which means although the market does seem like it lacks motivation among the buyers, there's really no fear among the buyers. No one's looking to hedge the risk of the market by buying options. So bullish in the long-term sense for equities, both in the US and Canada, but neutral in the short term. I just think that there is a good chance that we're going to see some pullback in the near term. The market can't really seem to figure out whether it wants to continue this upward trend or not. Bearish on gold, both short and long term. Neutral on the long-term chart of oil, and bearish in the short term. US stocks are holding the upward trend line, but have trouble breaking through resistance as money rotates into safety. The Canadian market remains strong, but due for a pullback. Speculative stocks are suffering right now, and it is best to trade either very short term or focus in on the lower risk stocks. Gold looking bearish while oil pulls back, and at this point there is no fear of a major correction. Well, that has been the Stockscores Market Minutes for May 9th, 2014. Have a great week in the market and trade well.